Welcome back to Crafting a Meaningful Life. I'm Mary Crafts, and I get to be with you today. I love that every single time I record because I really think of you out there as being part of my life, one with me. I'm one with you because we're trying to go to this place where we have crafted a meaningful life. And to do that, we have to be every day conscious of crafting that meaningful life. I have an amazing guest with me today. I'm very excited to introduce you to. And this is Michael Caprio. Welcome, Michael.
Hi, yes, welcome. Thank you for having me.
I am thrilled to have you. When you first reached out to me and I read your one sheet, I thought, okay, this is the best thing I could possibly offer to people for at that time of the year when we're looking to launch new things in our lives, to take charge of our life. Because at such a young age, that's exactly what you were called to do. So I'd like you to explain to my listeners a little bit about the disease that you were diagnosed with, a little bit about it, and then this whole process of operations you went through. When I read those, I was blown away at such a young age to be having to go through that. So let's tell me about that.
Yep, so the condition I was diagnosed with is called familial adenomatous polyposis, and that's a mouthful, so you could just say FAP for short. That's what most people
Okay,
call it.
gosh.
Yep, and basically what that is, with all those words, is it's a form of genetic colorectal cancer that accounts for 0.5% of all colorectal cancer cases
Okay.
in the United States. So it is a very rare
Yeah.
disease. And basically, what the name of it all means and what the condition entails in general, it means that I possess a gene in my body that doesn't stop the growth of polyps in my large intestine. And,
Ah,
in case nobody
okay.
knows what polyps are, precancerous bumps that grow in your intestines that most people get removed as they turn 30, 40, 50 through colonoscopies or endoscopies in my case because I don't have a large intestine. And basically what my condition is the gene that's in my body, the polyps grow out of control in my large intestine. They can't be stopped. So I don't have a mechanism in my body to stop them from growing. They have the opposite effect. They just grow out of control. So I had to get a blood test to confirm that the gene was present in my body.
Mm.
And I had that happen to me my senior year of high school when I was 18 years old. And then after the blood test was, confirmed, we had to make sure it was accurate. And by doing that, I also had to get a colonoscopy at 18 during my senior year of high school. And basically, the test showed that my large intestine was completely covered in polyps.
Oh,
The way I described it in my book, and to people who asked, is there was thousands of them, and it looked like my large intestine was lined with bubble wrap. So it was, yeah, it was. My surgeon told me that it was pretty urgent and it was imperative that I get operated on after graduating high school. So then 2 weeks after graduating high school, I went to Mount Sinai in Manhattan. That's where my group of surgeons are that I'm very lucky and blessed to have. And then I had my first surgery, which was 9.5 hours under the knife to get the entirety of my large intestine removed. And I was in the hospital for 11 days and I had 3 months of recovery after that, where I had an ostomy. Again, if for those of you who don't know, an ostomy is where they cut a hole in the side of your abdomen and they pull your small intestine through, and that's basically how you would go to the bathroom. That happened to me because after my first surgery, I was operated on for 9.5 hours, all on my intestines, so they needed to heal for 3 months. So I had to heal by wearing the ostomy, and then in 3 months after my body recovered and I was able to start slowly putting weight back on and getting somewhat back to myself, I went in for my second surgery, which was to reverse the ileostomy and finish creating what I have, which is called the J pouch. Basically, a J pouch is a J-shaped pouch shaped made out of the end of my ileum, which is your small intestine, and they basically suture it together to be shaped like a J, and that would be, hence where the name comes from, and that's why they make that basically to not have an ostomy, to not have the need for an ostomy.
and outside of
So
the
for
body. This is inside the
yeah,
body.
so
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So I still go to the bathroom the normal way now. So essentially, what my surgery is I had my intestines rearranged, and
Yeah.
more or less in a simple way, put it.
Wow. Okay, so there's just so much there to talk about. I
hmm
first want to go and talk to you about how did you know that you were having this problem? What were the symptoms? And then the second part of that is how do you feel at such a young age that your life, without control of yourself, is
hmm
changing?
Yeah. So for me, it's weird. So looking back on it and knowing what I know now, I could probably pinpoint the exact moment where I started to show symptoms of it. But with my disease and genetic diseases in general, it's kind of odd the symptoms that show themselves. So for me, and the way I wrote it in my book, is I went into the hospital as seemingly perfectly healthy 18-year-old kid on the outside.
Ah,
I didn't have any symptoms like you would assume that with my condition I would have GI issues. I would have trouble
yeah,
eating, or I'd be going to the bathroom or stuff like that. I never had any of that. I was always able to kind of eat whatever I wanted, and I was always active, and I never had there was no symptoms like that would point to like, oh, you're going to have a serious major digestive disease and surgery to follow it. So for me, but looking back on it, as I mentioned, so like some of the weirder things when I was a kid, and I wrote this in my book, and I've talked about it on a few podcasts, is I had really bad teeth. So my baby teeth had trouble falling out, and when I was like 12 or 13, I forget the exact age, but when I was very young, I had to get all my baby teeth removed. Like they basically had to pull 18 of them because they weren't falling out and they were growing in rows. Like my adult teeth and my baby teeth were kind of like lining up like shark teeth almost,
yeah,
just kind
yeah.
of growing in behind each other and whatever. And then I also had like a odontoma, I believe it was what it's called. I had to get oral surgery, and basically what that is it's a super rare like bone spur that grew right here in my mouth, and I had to get my gums, operated on. They had to cut them open and like vacuum the bone fragments out. So FAP, one of the early warning signs are teeth issues and bone spurs. So I had teeth issues and a bone spur in my mouth. So
Right.
like it was kind of tied together. And then like another example of a bone spur is like I have one on my head. It might be hard to see. It's benign. It's harmless, but it's just like a little
Yeah,
bump there,
yeah.
and I can feel it. So like those are weird little things. I know my mom has like bumps on her hand, a few on her forehead as well. You don't really notice them unless she asks. Like I said, weird little things like that. I know there's a few other things. Like I believe like desmoid tumors are another sign, and there's definitely a few other that I'm missing. But like I said, they don't. If you're a person who doesn't know that you have a genetic history with the condition, these are things that seem so far off and unrelated that you would never connect those
Right.
dots. And
So,
then I'm sorry, what was the second part of your question?
um, well, it's how you felt when you found this out. But I want to back
Ah,
up to this
yes.
other part we've been talking about, which is actually the disease and the diagnosis. So, did your mom know she had this?
Yeah, so I mean, it was a little different for my family. My family history with it, this is actually a good thing to elaborate on. I have it, my mom has it, my aunt has it, my grandma had it, my grandma's mom had it, and
Ah,
my grandma's sister had it. So I'm actually the only guy in the family who had it. Just total coincidence that it worked out that way. But
yeah.
yeah, going back to the 70s when my grandma found out that it runs in the family through her mother having it, it was actually, back then it was totally different how things worked. My grandma's mom died very young and suddenly from the disease because she had all the polyps in her large intestine, and you didn't know back then, and unfortunately her colon perforated and she died very young and tragically. And then my grandma, who was very close with her mom, found, was grieving and going through all that. And then they found out at the time that what had killed my grandma's mom at the time was our condition. And, they didn't even really understand what it was. So then on top of my grandma's grief and, my Aunt Ronnie, her sister, on top of their grief, they got diagnosed with it and they both had it. So the gene's 50-50. I have a brother. He didn't get it. I got it 50-50. My grandma had four daughters. My mom and my aunt got it. The other two did not.
Ah,
So, I
okay.
mean, 50-50. That's just how it goes. In my grandma's case, unfortunately, her and my Aunt Ronnie both had it. But in a way, they were thankful for that because they were able to navigate it together. At least they weren't alone.
Right.
But yeah, then they went down the route of just having a bunch of experimental procedures and them not really knowing what to do as far as treatment goes. And then, this is all detailed in the book. I kind of go down my family's medical history because we had a lot of very famous surgeons work on my grandma back in the day, and a lot of innovative surgeons who came from overseas to Mount Sinai in the city and brought new treatments here. One of them, which my grandma actually had, she ended up having what's called a Koch pouch, Koch. And that's basically an internal reservoir. So instead of an ostomy being on the outside, my grandma had like a very tiny hole that was covered with a band-aid, and she would go to the bathroom through a tube. So like at the time in the 70s, that was extremely revolutionary because you didn't have to wear
Right.
an external ostomy. Exactly. So that was one example. And then my grandma, everybody has handled it differently. The diagnosis news, it's always kind of tough. My grandma wanted to be very on the forefront with everything. So once she had kids, she knew that it was 50-50 and all this stuff could happen. So my mom knew at like 13 or very young that she had it. And my mom didn't like that experience at all because she spent her whole young adult life freaking out over this. So for me, my parents were always aware. And this is something that my grandma and my mom would kind of have somewhat odds on. And again, it's all, I'm not mad at either of them. Everybody has their own reasons. I totally get where my mom's coming from. I get where my grandma's coming from. But, when they were raising me and when I had the teeth episode, for example, when I was a kid, that was like my grandma, she kind of knew then that I had it. And my
Mm-hmm.
mom's like, even if we do know, we're not telling him now, because I was like
Ah,
8 or 9.
okay. Yeah.
So those things get revealed later down the road. But I don't blame them. If I had no, I only knew for 6 months prior to me getting operated on, and it drove me crazy. So if I had known for 10 years, I personally don't think that would have been good for me. So I'm glad my mom did it her way. But yeah, that's just a little bit about it. And then to kind of segue into, when you said, how did it make me feel? Just because I was about to get into that a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very isolating. I was a person in high school who already felt isolated naturally as it was. I kind of elaborate on this in the book. The person you see today and the person I am now didn't exist in high school. I was very shy. I was very timid. I didn't really take chances or try things or put myself out there. I was kind of the person who thought like, I was afraid of failure. So if you try and fail, that was scary to
Mm-hmm.
me. So just don't try at all, right? So that's kind of just like a glimpse into how I thought back then. And then I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life. And when you're a senior in high school, you're surrounded by everyone who's got all these plans and they want to do this and they're going to go here for school. And like I had none of that. And I didn't have any of it figured out to begin with. And then on top of it, I got this news that, oh, 2 weeks after you graduate, you're going to be fighting for your life with this strange condition that none of your
Yeah.
high school peers will ever be able to understand. And, my life it just added to the confusion. Like, it made me feel like, why me? It made me feel like
Yeah.
I already don't have things figured out. Why is this being thrown on my plate? It made me question everything. And, I went through the whole spectrum of negative emotions, unfortunately. But, that's where it
Yeah.
led me to where I am now. So I am thankful.
I love that when people come to that point, when they can see
Hmm.
that the struggle is where your growth came from, and your
Exactly.
growth is where your beauty came from. And you get to discover this authentic, beautiful person inside that without the struggle, you would not have
Hmm.
known. And that's a beautiful piece in and of itself, just right there, to be able to come to that. I
Thank
have never had this disease, but now that
you.
I'm
Lucky.
70, trust me, I know all about polyps. And
Yeah.
I've had
Hmm.
my
Yeah.
share of colonoscopies and so far to this point. Of course, they're benign. But when you're laying there on the table just before they do the colonoscopy, and especially maybe afterwards when you're in the waiting room, thinking, what if something comes back? What if
Hmm.
this were a diagnosis and this would be like, I'm looking at death?
Hmm.
For those moments, for me, it's a short time. But for you, it's always there. It was always something
Hmm.
that you knew you were going to have to face.
Hmm.
As you faced this, did you feel like you had the support system in place that you needed, or did you have to create that?
I had So that's a good question. So I always had it. That definitely was always there. I just needed to realize it. And I guess that could kind of be creating it also.
Yeah.
For me, and this was something I wrote about a lot in my book. After my surgery, I kind of got myself into a headspace where I had convinced myself that I was a burden to my loved ones around me. Just because I was
Uh,
bedridden, or I wasn't even bedridden, I was on the couch. I couldn't even sleep in my bed because I had staples in my stomach, and I was totally dependent on other people. I couldn't even walk around the house. I couldn't drive. I couldn't do all these things. And so for me, it was really, disheartening. It was discouraging to have your independence stripped from you like that. And like when they break all these things down to you, how it's going to be, and pre-surgery, like before you go in to get operated, and all these meetings you have with surgeons, they tell you these things, but it's different when you wake up and you're actually officially living it.
Yeah.
So like for me, it was just a lot of trying to figure out how to navigate it and where to go. And, luckily for me, my family was always trying to show me that, that was there for me. But like I said, at the time, I was convinced I was bothering them, that, they would be better off without me. Very foolish to think that, obviously. But the reason why I'm happy, I thought, or not happy, thankful is a better word. Thankful I thought that way is because it led me to my rock bottom moment, and my rock bottom moment has been my pillar for never going back. Like it's
Yeah.
always a reminder of why I chose the route I've chosen. To not to be open about everything and to not be negative and to try and think of things in a positive
Mm.
light. So for me, my rock bottom moment was, as I mentioned, when I was in that headspace of just kind of blowing my family and friends off and not really reaching out to them, not really giving them an inch when they were trying to make me smile and all that. They really tried. It wasn't their fault. It was my fault. And basically, after days of just sulking on the couch and not giving them anything, my mom could sense something was wrong. And when I was on the couch, she was sleeping alongside of me on the couch just so I wasn't alone. So
I
one day
love
she just kind
that.
of asked me, and she just kind of asked me and was saying, like, what's on your mind? You can tell me, I'm your mother. And I had very dark thoughts on my mind. So I was saying, I'm like, do you really want to hear what's on my mind? Like, is that something you really want? And she said, yes, I want to hear that. That's what I'm here for. So at the time, and again, as I said this, I did not think it was going to break my mother's heart because of the headspace I was in. But I had told her if I knew that this was going to happen to me, I'd wish I'd never be born. And basically, that was stabbing my mother in the
Yeah.
chest and spitting in her face, quite frankly, because it's genetic. My parents were dealing with so much that I hadn't even considered because I was just so wrapped up in my own pity and my own misery that I hadn't even given a moment to consider that maybe my parents are dealing with a tough time behind closed doors because they made a decision to have children, knowing the risks. And nothing in life is guaranteed, also. Like, I'm not mad at my parents, obviously, but, like, and that was their logic. You can adopt a child and they could have a disease, that was from their birth parents that you never knew about and you don't know how to handle it. My dad's reasoning was like, well, at least we know how to handle it. We have, 4 people in the family who've been through it. They're all fine now. So, like, by me saying that, I was kind of making them think maybe we made the wrong choice. So I kind of saw how that deflated my mother. And then she went out on the deck and she started crying. And then my dad came home that day and he heard her crying on the deck.
Mm.
And I still, at this point, hadn't even registered that she was out there crying. I still didn't even realize I said anything wrong. I was just in my own mode. And when my dad came home, he talked to my mom for a bunch. And when he came inside, he just kind of had one of those dad moments where, like, he's not even mad. He was just disappointed. He just had that look on his face. And he was like, did you really tell your mother that you wish you were never born? And, I said yes, still not realizing what I had done. And then, my dad just kind of took a pause and he looked at me and he said, he's like, you know what? He's like, you're not the only one that's feeling bad about this. We're going through guilt too. Your mother hasn't been able to sleep in months, and this is killing her inside. And, you saying that to her is really gonna, it destroyed her. And then, like, after he said that to me, I still heard her crying on the deck. And then it's like, I snapped out of it. It was the first time where, like, I took a step back and I was actually thinking about what I had just said. And I was thinking about how I just hurt the people who love me the most. And I witnessed it. And then that night, I was obviously very ashamed once I realized what I had done
Mm.
and the hurt that I had caused on my family. And it just kind of made me replay the moment over and over again in my head, which I'm thankful for again because it made me come to these conclusions. But at the time, I wasn't happy. And I basically just said to myself, I really hurt my family today. And if I give up, I could destroy my family. Like, if I give up, I don't know what's going to happen to my mom,
Yeah.
my brother, or my dad. I don't know how they're going to go forward. Who knows how much larger that ripple effect can be. So then once I realized that, what, things might not be great right now, things might not. Who knows if things are going to get better, right? Like, I didn't know at the time. That was the first step I admitted to myself, is I said I don't know if
Yeah.
things are going to get better, but I got to try for these people.
Yeah.
So that was the first step that got me going in the right direction. And then as time went on, when things started to get better naturally, and I started to get my health back, and then I started to open up about what happened to me, and I received positive feedback, and all that as things started compounding positively, I just realized, this is the path I have to go. This is the path that I need to, like just to for my family's sake, for my sake, and on a larger scale. So that's that moment, as painful as it always is to reflect on and talk about, it is the moment that snapped me out of it. So I am thankful for it.
I I feel prompted to share with you how you have just helped me.
Absolutely, go for it.
Um, as I've had back problems for quite a while, but I've been putting off doing any surgery. And for
Hmm.
four, well, geez, I don't know, for like, I'm thinking maybe 12 years, I've just been putting it off as my back's been getting worse. And now
Hmm.
I'm done with being on drugs. I'm done with all
Hmm.
of that pain. And so nothing's working. I'm going to have to face back surgery. And as I
Hmm.
came home from that appointment, and that night, I was laying on the sofa out here, and I just started crying because I thought I would be better off if I hadn't ever met John, if I hadn't ever brought him into my life, because now for 6 months he's going to have to just care for me like a baby.
Hmm.
I'd be better off to leave him now and not have to have him do
No,
this.
that's never the answer.
And finally, like you, he just kept asking me,
Hmm.
"Tell me how you're feeling. What are you feeling?" I blurted that out, and then he started to cry, just like your mom. And he was like,
Yeah, that
"How
is
dare you
similar.
think that I would not want to be here with you? And that
Hmm.
it was wrong
It's
for
a
us
it's a
to ever be
mental trap,
together." And
Hmm.
the more I sat with that, the more I realized that I was going to get through this. And
Hmm.
that in the end, it might be the thing that created the biggest bond between us.
Yeah, that's kind of how it is with my family too.
Yeah.
It bonded us.
So I appreciate you sharing that perspective. Um,
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing that with
yeah.
me.
So, one, helped Mary.
That's good. We always try to help, right? That is, after all, the point.
All right. So I know that has been kind of your mission, your goal, your vision for what you're doing in the aftermath of this. Now, as a recovered
Hmm.
person and looking back at the lessons that brought you to this point. So tell me about the decisions you made then and what you've done with your book.
Pretty much, I always try to share this story, and it just gives it's a good lesson, and I wrote about this in my book. It's a good for people who want to know the impact of little positive decisions each day. This is a story I always like to tell. So for me, the way I try to paint that for people is my mom, who I've mentioned, has a very colorful medical history because what they did to her in the 70s and 80s initially, they didn't really know. So my mom didn't want to wear an ostomy. She was kind of a bad patient. She'd be the first person to tell you that. And when she when she was in college, she wasn't going to get operated on if it was an ostomy. She refused, and she also refused to have what my grandma had. So obviously at the time, this was causing chaos in some ways.
Yeah.
And the surgeons, were saying the polyps are starting to get bigger, like you need to get operated on or you're going to get sick or possibly die. So my mom waited to the very end until they found something else to do to her, something that they don't even really know, because I'll get to that in a second. A couple years ago, I'll get to that. But so they didn't really know at the time what they had done to her, but they operated on her when she started to get symptoms. So my mom was already a little sick. It made it a lot more difficult. She was in the hospital
Mm,
for like a couple months, so her
wow.
road to recovery was a lot more difficult than mine. Partially because of some of the choices she made, but she got better quality of life out of it because of what they winded up doing to her. But my mom was always the type of person who was pretty quiet and guarded about what happened to her. Obviously, on my mom's side of the family, they knew, but on my dad's side, they didn't really know, and they kind of just respected her privacy. And, that's kind of how I remember it for most of my life. I kind of knew my mom had something with her. I mean, my mom
Yeah.
lives a normal life, but I knew something was off. I just didn't know what exactly. So she was always more quiet, guarded about that. She said when she got older, she and it's funny, my grandma was the opposite. My grandma was like the one who was doing
Bah,
experimental
bah, bah.
procedures. Yeah,
Yeah.
talking about it and sign it. Like she would do like voluntary endoscopies and all this stuff for research on the condition. So my mom and her would be at odds because my grandma would always say, "Well, you need to do this," and my mom was like, "I'm not doing what you do." Like I did what I needed to do to be alive. Whatever happened, however my life plays out, we're gonna let it play out. So that was basically my mom's stance always. But then after I had that rock bottom moment and I started to be more positive and open about everything, like I said, I had positive feedback from friends, from family. It opened up the conversation on my dad's side, who knew nothing about what had happened to my mom. They started to know through me. And then they were obviously much more understanding and talking to my mom about it.
Mhm.
And then my mom started talking more about it and she became more open. So, because of my choices to kind of wear it on my sleeve and not really care, it kind of made her a little more secure in
Mm.
herself. So,
What a gift you
then
gave
at
to her.
exactly. And
Yeah.
so
Wow.
yeah, no, it's I got a nice knot here at the end too. So when it was 2020, I believe, yeah, 2019. So my grandma got sick unrelated to FAP in 2019. She was just in her 80s and she had a form of cancer that was rare. It wasn't related to FAP. But in a way, it kind of, we knew time was getting towards the end and we spent a lot more time with her. And I was at college at the time. And I basically would call her all the time, visit her on weekends and whatnot. And I remember, and this was years after doing, the positive thing. At this point, I was at college with the intent of writing the book. I was writing it in my private time, sending it to my grandma, letting my family read it. And I had their blessing on it, of course, but I didn't have like anything official that I was talking to outside of my family. But within my family, they knew. So it was
Mhm.
leading to that point at in 2019. And I remember when it was probably a month before she passed. It was one of the last days I went down to her house to hang out with her. I remember we were hanging out on her bed and we were just kind of, we were having normal conversations. We were trying not to talk about the sad stuff that was obviously on our minds.
Yeah.
But, she was just kind of holding my hand and we were talking about stupid stuff. And she said, years ago, I forgot to mention this, but years ago we had a conversation when I was down and out, after my rock bottom moment and all that, where she was taking care of me, and she was kind of picking my brain and asking me, how I'm feeling and whatnot. And then she knew I wasn't doing good, and I was giving vague answers, and she told me the story of my birth story. So a little bit about me: I was born on Christmas Eve. I just recently,
Yeah.
so I just turned 27 recently.
Happy
But
birthday.
yeah, so I was thank you. So I was born on Christmas Eve, and my grandma, the way she put it, she told my birth story. So she loves this story. My mom wasn't supposed to have children in general, especially after my brother, just because of all the work she had done to her. And I remember, they didn't want my brother to be an only child, so they tried and they tried and they tried. But one doctor in particular, even told them it would take a miracle. And then, a couple months later, my mom started showing symptoms of a pregnancy with me, and she didn't know what it was because she was told it would take a miracle. So she went to a doctor and she's like, I think I'm pregnant, but this doesn't make any sense. And she explained everything. And the doctor's like, well, I guess your miracle child's coming because you're pregnant. And there's. So my grandma was like, I'll never forget where I was when I received that phone call. I was so happy. And like my grandma said that I was supposed to be born in the new year, so in January, actually around this time, probably like right around this week, or maybe another week after this. And I arrived early on Christmas Eve. So, as my grandma put it, she said I was sent here for a reason by God, and I had to be here to figure out what that reason is. And that's kind of how she gave me a little nugget of hope to hold on
I
to,
love
so
that.
that, that's what she instilled in me. So that was very helpful. So then we flash forward to this moment in 2019 after all these years had passed where we're sitting on the bed, and she brought that conversation up. She's like, do you remember when I was taking care of you and I told you that, your birth story and that you had to be here for a reason and we just don't know what that reason is yet? And I said, yeah, of course I remember that conversation. And she said, I think you were sent here to save your mother's life as well as help other people. But
Yeah,
she
yeah.
said, I think you were sent here to save your mother's life. And she said, she's like, because your mother now, the way she talks about it, that was never her. She was never going to do anything, surgery wise. She all swore all that off. And she's like, you've totally changed her. Like, I never thought she'd be able to change. And then
Mhm.
after my grandma passed away, her wish to my mother was that she couldn't give up on me or my aunt. We called ourselves the club. So my grandma said, "You can't give up on the club." So then my mom, like a good daughter and a good mother, went to go get her scopes, and that's when they found out that, and this was in 2020 during the pandemic, they had
Yeah.
found out that they didn't know what they did to my mom in the 70s because my mom still had part of her large intestine left behind, and it had a lot of polyps, and you know
Yeah.
it was she wasn't sick then, but it was urgent, and this had been 5 years since I got operated on. I was told that she was going to get a reversal to have what I have. Now, that was impossible 5 years ago when I got operated on. They told me reversals were not.
Wow.
So, even in just 5 years, that advancement happened. So, obviously, it was weird in a way because the roles were reversed. I was the person, sitting, waiting for a phone call from my dad to let me know mom was out of surgery. And I was the person who was waiting. My mom was always the person who had to wait and be on the opposite end. And it was a weird role reversal because I was in my mom's shoes. I was the one who was
Yeah.
worrying and not getting any sleep and trying to make sure she's all right. And then in my head, I knew, okay, even if the surgery is good, she's going to have to wear an ostomy for 3 months. There's going to be another surgery. It's going to be a year of recovery. Like I knew in my head that this is going to be a really long road just after the surgery. And I was really stressed out over it, obviously. I didn't know how she was going to react to it. There was a lot of things that she said she'd never do again that she was going to have to do. And it was without my grandma. And my mom took it like a champ. I did not have, my mom took all the worries out of my head. She did not complain. She did not show a moment of weakness. And she even said there was a time after, because it happened, of course, during the craziest time. It happened during COVID. And we live in, the New York metro area. So my my mom was literally in the hospital when they were whisking people out in like hazmat suits and stuff. So it was really crazy. I remember just thinking to myself, "Oh, my mom survived the surgery. Please God, don't let her get the coronavirus." Like that would just kind of feel like a gut punch. But thank God someone was watching out for us. I think it was my grandma. But when she came
Absolutely.
home, yeah, and when she came home from the hospital, I remember I kind of had to play home nurse for a little bit. We had a home nurse who visited a couple times a week because they brought everyone home when they still had tubes in them and stuff. So I kind of had to take care of my mom for a little bit when she was home. And I remember like one day when I was helping my mom like clean her like her Jackson Pratt tubes, which are just like surgery tubes where fluid drains from.
Yep.
And she was just saying, like, we kind of had a moment where we laughed. And she's like, I never thought I'd be doing this again. And where she said, she's like, I'd never be doing this if it wasn't for you. And we kind of just had a moment where we realized, like, had I not gone down this path of 5 years, making all
Mm.
these little choices and taking all these small steps, and I mean like 1,000 small steps. Like this is five
Mm.
years of small steps we're talking about here, and small decisions and little adjustments in attitude and you name it, any little decision you could think of. How
Yeah.
and I did that for 5 years, and my reward for it is my mom's still here, and that's the way I view it. Is you know when we talked about it, like had I not down this route, what would my life look like? And I don't want to know what it would look like because it wouldn't be good, but that's just all the more reason to keep. You don't really realize how big your impact and your reach is, and how big the butterfly effect is, so to speak, on just how far your positive decisions can make. And that kind of goes even outside of my own story. Like I know my grandma was like that. I could say the same thing about her, and I talked about this in my book. There's like a million things between my life, my mom's life, my grandma's life, all the way down our family history, where like they had a million reasons to give up, to not have kids, to not do this, to not do that. But if they didn't do that, I wouldn't be here. My mom and dad would have never met. All
Right.
the people's lives they've impacted would have never happened. I mean, like, it's a different world. And that's just me. Like, that's just my family. Now, imagine what everybody listening, or
Yeah.
like everybody you come in contact with. We really are all connected. And like, that's just kind of the experience my life has led me to realize, is that everything really does matter. Every little decision really does matter. And if you're not careful, things could either compound negatively in a really bad way, or they could compound positively in a way that you really won't be able to imagine what it'll manifest into until it actually happens.
You kind of remind me, like George Bailey. You really did
That's
have
a
a
couple.
wonderful life, and so did your family. So did your grandmother. So did your mother. And
Mhm.
look at all that would have been impacted if you had never been,
Yeah.
been born.
And that's my mom's favorite movie too, by the way. It's a
Yeah,
Wonderful Life.
it's mine too, so that's okay.
Yes.
But
Yeah, so that's always.
I wish their time was not up, Michael. Your book sounds absolutely amazing, and I'm going to
Thank you.
include at the end of the podcast so people can find the link on Amazon and also how to connect with you on all your social media points and follow you. Your concept at such a young age that every single decision matters. I don't come across a lot with at your age,
Mm.
and this
You know, it's rare. Hmm.
positive approach to life and how it can change you. It
Hmm.
absolutely can change you. And you talked about hitting rock bottom. Um, I remember after my divorce that, or in the middle of it, I should say, that I felt this was rock bottom. And
Hmm.
then that bottom fell out. And then there was
Yeah.
another spot that was even lower.
Hmm.
And I kept thinking, have I completely screwed up my life? Have I completely messed everything? Really, is it maybe I should never have been born? That whole kind of scenario. But when
Hmm.
I got to the rock bottom, like you, who found your rock bottom, what stronger thing do you want to build your life on than the rock?
Hmm.
That rock bottom to start building from the rock and screw your
Hmm.
foundation in to what is rock bottom. You
Hmm.
know is going to build the strongest foundation you could have ever created. Michael, you really are an amazing individual to have passed through all of that and ended up at this spot of love and beauty. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me share my story and being such a kind host.
Well, you really gave me a gift, so thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, of course.
And to all of our listeners, I do hope that you listen to Michael's podcast, but beyond that, follow him and his book is on Amazon and all those things that connect you with a person who found what rock bottom was and how to build a beautiful life. The name of Michael's book is A Bump in the Road. If you're looking for it, it's A Bump in the Road. And I love the title, A Bump in the
Thank
Road,
you.
because really some people would see that as not a bump, but rather a mountain and a cliff,
Yeah, I did that a
But,
lot.
it's just like a bump for you. And look what you've
Hmm.
created. Mm,
Yeah, that's my dad always phrased it that way. It was his best friend, his wife had cancer, and it was like that was like their battle cry around her cancer diagnosis, and their battle they had was it's just a bump in the road and we're going to get through it. And then my dad started saying it, and that's why I felt it was an appropriate title for the book, is because it's what we said to get through it, and it's also true.
yeah. My back surgery now, it's just a bump in
Just a
my
bump in the
road.
road. Yep.
All right. Thank you so much for being here. And until next time, remember that each and every day we get to craft our meaningful life. And what will yours be? Namaste.
Crafting a Meaningful Life.